Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. All right, my name is Laura LeBlue. I am a managing editor for thought leadership here at ServiceNow. And I am thrilled to be here with two of my compatriots. This is Vanessa Smith. She's a Senior Vice President of Industries and Solutions. We also have Hannah Datz, VP of Customer Workflow. So, first of all, I just have to kick this off real quick by saying I've been at this company 7.5 years. I think this is my 5th knowledge. There are so many more ladies in the house right now. Okay, thank you very much. It was noticeable. Like when I walked in, I was like, something's a little different than the last 5 years. You know, notwithstanding the last 2 years, which were very different. Anyway, that brings us to our topic, talking about creating psychological safety in the workplace. And yeah, I feel like the best way to start this is to just, let's define it. What is psychological safety for the workplace, for men and for women?
Awesome, I guess I'll kick off. So first, just to build on Laura's comments, when I first got asked to do a session on psychological safety at an IT conference, I was like, who's going to show up? So thank you guys so much for prioritizing this, and it's a really great opportunity to talk about a super important topic. So the question was, how do we define psychological safety? And I think about it in kind of 4 buckets. So first, creating an environment where opinions are valued. People feel like they can be heard and they're being listened to, and it's a valued discussion. The second, in a psychologically safe environment, is when you're invited to participate. You all know you've got people on your teams who have strong opinions, but they don't feel like they have the opportunity to speak up. So being invited to participate in the conversation. The third is around feeling like there's not going to be any negative repercussions from what you said. So if your opinion's valued, you're invited to speak up. You also need to feel if you say something that's unpopular or against the status quo that there's not going to be any backlash. And last but not least, that there's action taken. That doesn't mean that your opinion or your idea has to be adopted, but someone's going to close the loop with you to say, we heard you, we listened, and here's the feedback, and here's what we're going to do about it. So those are kind of the 4 ways I describe a psychologically safe environment. But if you look at the statistics, it's pretty concerning about where we are. I was doing some external research, and it shows that only about 43% of employees feel like they work in a psychologically safe environment, and less than 1 in 10 feel like their opinion is being valued. However, companies that do this well, the impact is immense. So first, productivity is 12% higher, and turnover is 27% lower. So for all of you, whether you're in leadership positions or whether you're an individual contributor, there's huge impact on the bottom line on creating a psychologically safe environment. And I'll end with just, when I think about what is psychological safety, you all know the Maya Angelou quote. It basically ends with, it's how you make people feel. It's not what you do, it's not what you say, but when you leave an environment or a conversation, how do people feel? And when people feel good, I think that's a psychologically safe environment.
Absolutely. Do you have anything to add on to that, Hannah?
That was a beautiful definition.
Right?
Like,
I'm
oh
like,
my
well,
God.
I think the mic got dropped a little early, but we still have places to go.
I mean, I think I'll just add to that and say, so this is an interesting topic for me. Beyond doing what I do at ServiceNow, I just finished some graduate work at the University of Pennsylvania focused on diverse leaders and if they can be authentic at work without retribution. So this topic fits in really nicely with that. And one little study that I read as part of my research focused on Penn Law students. And they took a segment of Penn Law students, 50-50, men and women, coming into a new class of Penn Law, and then they looked at the graduates. And in the top 10% of the class, men were 2 to 3 times more likely to be in that performing group. Why do you think that is? Because men are smarter than women, right?
Yeah.
It all had to do with the learning environment in which these students were in, and that's a microcosm of psychological safety. There was an element specifically on women, and this happens to all groups, by the way, but specifically in this study, called a double blind. And for those of you who have heard of what that is, that's 2 opposing elements which seem to hold a dichotomy, but an individual is expected to carry both. So in the case of this, it was a female needing to be passive, be demure, but also having the expectation of success, being someone that was challenging, asking questions, raising their hand and pushing authority. And so when we create environments where the definition of success is diametrically opposed, that's not a psychologically safe environment, and it leads to some of the outcomes that Vanessa was talking about earlier.
Wow, it's just, I think we've all been there, right? I know I have been. And Hannah, I would love to hear from you an example of what it was like to feel psychologically safe in a business or a work environment. What do you have any experience that you can share with us?
Yeah, and I think in my career I've been really lucky that I've had amazing leaders that I've worked for that have made me feel really part of the club, so to speak, even though tend to take on these roles where I don't look like anybody else in my peer set. I remember the first line leadership role I took, I was in my 20s, and a lot of folks older than me and all male that were sitting around the lunch table at our first meeting. And this is a simple thing for leaders in the room, male, female, kind of whatever you are, is the first conversation that was being had was about a sports playoff game. And I know that's kind of a silly example, and it's something that we all kind of talk about at work all the time, but it just wasn't something I followed. And I noticed the HR business professional who was at the table noticed I was kind of disengaged in the conversation, and this was my first time meeting the team. And he kind of changed the topic of conversation. He said to the table, "Did you guys know Hannah met her husband doing improv comedy in college?" Everyone was like, "Oh, that's really cool. That's really interesting," right? And it kind of changed the tone of the conversation. But as leaders, I think it's up to us to find opportunities to see if people are engaged, get out of our own comfort zone of things we like to talk about, and invite people to have conversations that are inclusive.
Right. Yeah, it's about calling people in, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah. Vanessa, do you have any like experience to share?
Sure. I think it's around creating or being a part of a psychologically safe environment. I'm going to use an example of ServiceNow. So I joined ServiceNow during the pandemic in September 2020. I was coming into a new role that was newly created. I knew our CEO and one of our executives from a prior company, but other than that, it was a completely new team, new environment, et cetera. And I came to ServiceNow and I realized how proud the folks who had worked at ServiceNow for 10 plus years felt about their company and their product. At the same time, they knew that what got us here, great company, was not going to get us there, which is a huge enterprise software company at scale. And so we had all these new people coming in, including me. I think ServiceNow added, 8,000 people to the workforce since the pandemic. So we're at 18,000. When I started 2 years ago, we were just over 10. And so you had this really 3 generations of folks in the ServiceNow workforce. And I don't mean generations by age, but experience. Those who had been here since the beginning when we were a startup, those who took us from startup to our first billion, and then all these new folks like me and Hannah, frankly, coming in from bigger companies who knew how to do things at scale. And I think everybody felt uncertain. What does this mean? We wanted to not call the baby ugly, and they wanted to make sure that they were appreciated for the great way they've grown the company. And so what did we do at Now to kind of address that culture, that potential cultural cancer of these different generations not really coming from the same place? Well, our CEO created a managers forum, so all the VPs and SVPs at the company, and that's not that many, come together on a monthly basis, and we have an open forum, and one of the topics one month was this topic around how do we respect the folks who've been here, also respect the new folks who are coming in. And what was great about the session, it was a very open dialogue between peers. We did small breakout groups with the moderator, and that created a really safe environment for me with just 5 other people to kind of test out how would they feel when I talk about how I feel as a new person coming in. And then after that, we came back in the group Zoom, and we did a readout by breakout session, and it was a great dialogue. But what was even better is that moderator who was in my breakout session came back to me a week later and said, "I heard you say this, Vanessa, in the breakout. Let's talk about it more." So creating that action cycle and really tackling that tough cycle made me feel more empowered, more engaged, and psychologically safe.
And I can tell you, as someone who is in that second generation of ServiceNow employees, I appreciate that because we too were wondering what's going to happen next. And so those efforts made really did create a positive difference in, I think, my life and the other employees at ServiceNow. So, okay, all right, so we've talked about the good. I'd love to hear, Vanessa, let's go with you.
Okay.
Give me an example of a not so great experience in which you felt psychologically unsafe.
Well, I'll have to admit, I've been kind of feeling psychologically unsafe most of my career. Generally, like Hannah said, most environments that we go into, I'm the only one or less than 5%. So honestly, I don't detect that as much because I'm so used to it. That's common state for me. But I will give it a specific example. This was with my prior company. I had a great opportunity to work for an amazing female leader. And she was taking on a new role where she was put in a position to challenge the norm, to challenge the status quo, to kind of step on people's toes, step on their turf, to really change and transform the company. So she was rah-rah excited. I came in as her kind of COO to help her build this business and challenge the norm. And she had trouble getting buy-in from those leaders that she was stepping on their feet around her vision and plan. But she was so focused on, maybe because she was a female leader, driving results right away. So instead of taking that time to build the rapport, to build the buy-in, she said, go, go, go. And guess who she used in the middle to try to make things happen? It was me.
Oh my.
So I was sitting there in the middle of a very hard-driving boss who had the right vision but didn't have the buy-in, and then the teams we were trying to turn the corner with. And I would get on calls with her, and they would be drama-filled. I'd get on calls with them, and it just wasn't a great experience for me, even though she was an amazing leader. What did that lead for me? I became a little bit disenchanted, and I couldn't wait to find the next role, even though it was an amazing, amazing group. So I gave some stats at the beginning of the positives of creating a psychologically safe environment, but the negatives can be really challenging as well.
Yeah, it's so very true. Did you have one, Hannah, you want to share with us?
I
think, and then I want to.
Many.
Yeah, I know you have. I know. Let's try it. We'll stick with one.
No. So, I'm going to make a generalization, and you can find me later and blame me for it. But no matter who you are or what you are, when you take on a new role, you feel self-conscious about being ready for the role. And I don't care if you're a man, woman, whatever your demographics are. That happens to everybody. What can really be the knife in the wound is when you hear that repeated out loud by other people. And I had a situation where I had taken on a new role, again, only woman, and was very young, and I was feeling self-conscious about it, and kind of like glibly at a happy hour, another leader had said to me, like most people think you got this role because blah, 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 because you're connected or whatever. And I can tell you, that just was like it was like a blow to me as someone who was just starting out and hadn't heard that a lot yet. I think you build up a tolerance to that, unfortunately, over time. And it totally had an impact on how I treated my team. I had an amazing performance year. That drove me to be even better. And I was all about the numbers. And you better believe I ended that year. I was #1 on the team. I was walking on stage to get my little medal, kind of looking at that guy like, I told you. But at the expense of my team, I was cold. I was hard driving. I did not care about human beings. And I learned a ton that year about who I wanted to be because I did not feel very good at the end of every day. So I think when we put people in unsafe environments, they can't be themselves, they're unnatural, and sometimes even your best performers, you think, oh, they're killing it. There's something actually deeper going on there from time to time, and it's all about how do you unroot that to have the conversation and have that trust.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was thinking about this topic and thinking about how feeling unsafe creates fear, and fear leads to a fight or flight, mindset that can be applicable to the workplace, where either you want to just get the heck out of Dodge, right? Or you just want to bury your head in the sand. You're not going to contribute. You're not going to be able to innovate. You're not going to be able to really, be your best and bring your best self to the workplace. So, how, if this environment is feeling unsafe, how can a leader change that? What can they do to, steer the ship in the right direction and create safety for the people that they're working with?
I guess I'll go first here.
Yeah.
First, you have to acknowledge there's a problem.
Yeah.
How many of you guys have worked on a team and you guys go out to lunch with your team members and you're like, oh, this culture is toxic, we don't like X, Y, or Z, but your leader never acknowledges it. So if you're in a position of in a leadership position, I think first and foremost, you've got to assess and understand, do I have an issue there? When you acknowledge it yourself, then you need to acknowledge it with your team. There's improvements we can make. I know ServiceNow does a twice a year employee voice survey that gives people an anonymous opportunity to give feedback on the culture, on the climate.
I have said some things.
I will tell you, I've been in the fetal position on the ball in the corner reading some of the feedback, but you've got to acknowledge that there's improvements to make. That's number one. Once you acknowledge it with your team, sometimes that can be half the battle. My boss, my leader knows that there's some things here that we need to change. So that's step one, acknowledging. The second is listening. And I've seen lots of really decent strategies on listening. So the first is one-to-one listening. So we've all done the listening tours. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 people on your team that really they're the ringleaders in a good way or a bad way. How do you make that connection to those folks in a one-on-one way and have what I call courageous conversations? And actually somebody on my team coined that for me. I know maybe it's a general term, but I created this idea of, guys, if you need to talk to me, let's have a courageous conversation. They go in knowing that I'm ready to receive the feedback. And then I started hearing that language permeate throughout the company around having courageous conversations. And that really creates a psychologically safe environment. The last thing is getting to know people in an authentic way. And Hannah, I've known Hannah for many years. She's so good at that. Do you care about what's going on in their life? Do you care about what motivates them? Do you care about what their success is and how you can support their success? There comes this authenticity when you get to know people on a personal level and why they get up every morning. And I think breaking down those barriers, having those courageous conversations, listening and acknowledging are really big steps to creating that type of environment.
It's absolutely true. Hannah, do you have anything to add? I know we're running down the clock here,
yeah,
but anything?
I'll just, like vulnerability. I feel like we are doing a Brene Brown talk up here, but it's all about vulnerability and opening the kimono. I did a Strengths Finders with my team recently, and we really encouraged each other to have some courageous conversations. We've built that foundation now. It wasn't our first day working. And one of the guys that works for me, I shared some of my things that I'm working on, and he's like, I got to be honest with you, when you started as my leader, you reminded me of a boss I had that I put a ton of trust in, and then she broke my trust.
Oh, no.
So when I met you at first, you reminded me of that person, and I was kind of like, I'm not going to trust her. And just the fact that he could say that to me meant he now trusted me enough to say that, right? So I think it's when you create the open kimono, that becomes a conversation that feeds being able to address problems.
Right. So. Because we don't know what's going on.
Right.
We don't know everyone's carrying their problems. They're carrying such different baggage through the world, and to be able to make that connection is just so important. Okay, so here's the gazillion-dollar question for everyone out here who was kind enough to join this session. What's one thing that they can go back, no matter who they are, what level in the organization they are? What's one thing that they can take back into the workplace right now that they can do to create a more psychologically safe environment?
Well, I'm going to give more than one, sorry. But this just came to me now. Tell them about this session.
Yeah.
Tell them that you took the time to sit in on this and reflected on it, and then now you're signaling to your team, whether they work for you or their peers, or you work for someone, to say, hey, this was a topic important to me, and I think that we can improve as a company, as a team, as an organization if we have these conversations. So that's first and foremost.
All right.
Second, just one really small thing that made a huge difference for me and my team when I came into a new role earlier this year is I get into staff meetings, and I see my chief of staff sitting in the front row there, and I've got my agenda down every 10 minutes. We got to cover these 5 topics. And I went on in somebody else's staff meeting, and you know how they start the first 15 minutes of the meeting? They go around the room, and people talk about how their weekend went. They share pictures in advance, and you break the ice in a way that you feel like you know people on a different level. And I can tell you, even though that was 15 minutes out of a 1-hour agenda, the productivity level and the engagement for those last 45 minutes was so much higher than if we had dived right into the agenda. So small things that you care about the whole person. And then finally, encourage courageous conversations. Yep. Tell people to put that conversation on your calendar and have them open up.
It is so hard to follow Vanessa. Would any of you want to follow Vanessa? It's so hard to speak after. So the one thing I'd say is, I got this from a guy on my team. It's a great tip. When you're in a one-on-one with someone, what's the first thing you say? Hey, how you doing? Good. How are you? Good. All right. Anyway, back to the thing. How are you really doing? The person will be like, whoa, how am I really doing? And that totally sets an opportunity to like dive deep. So try it out. Worked for me.
Oh, thank you. Well, I love this. I've learned a ton. Thank you. We are definitely at time here, but thank you to everyone for coming out, for turning your attention and your energy to this subject.
Yeah,
it's
thanks.
so important. Yeah, you can clap. Come on. Oh, and please go forth, bring forth that safety into your workplaces and enjoy the rest of the convention here today. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.